Hello, Mr. Root. It's going to be one of those days, Mr. Root. Oh, there he is. There she is. There he is. Yes, that was Soldier band that played. They were playing at heavy metal Mardi Gras at which was a concert at a bunch of bands came together in California back in the late '80s, Christian bands, and they were one of them. And you can see some of the members are black men. So I thought that was appropriate because they're sort of the vocalist is black and one of the guitar players. So to honor Black History Month, I thought I would play from this Christian band. And now I will talk about this gentleman that we see here. Where are you, sir? My notes somewhere. Oh, there we go. Here we go. Should say. This man, Pierre Toussaint, Venerable Pierre Toussaint. There we go. Philanthropist. Well, yeah. And that's an actual photograph picture of him, or an early form of We have a ghost. Okay. Hello, Miss Hobbs. Venerable Pierre Toussaint, when did he live? 1766 until 1853. 1766 until 1853. Second. I guess it's not. Okay. Anyways, born in Haiti. He was born in Haiti. I don't think it was a country then, but nevertheless. And in 1787, he was born as a slave. He was owned by a French family. France at that time controlled the western portion of the island of Santo Domingo, as it's called. And you have two countries on it today. You have the country of Haiti on the west, and on the east you have. What's the country on the eastern half of the island? Huh? Thank you, Ms. Donnelly. The Dominican Republic. The island of Santo Domingo, as it's called in general. Okay, so he came from there. He was brought to the United States in 1787. He was brought to New York City by the Berard family, which owned him. Not technically and really, obviously, but, they thought they was their slave. The Berard family, and he was trained as a hairdresser. Okay, so, he fixed women's hair, And he became the most successful one in New York City. He was very good at his job, actually, apparently. So he became quite famous as a good hairdresser. After her husband's death, and they lost their sugar plantation that they had on Haiti, because, in the history of Haiti, there was a slave revolt, and the slaves basically killed all the French that were there and declared the nation of Haiti. So they lost their sugar plantation. The Berard family did. And then the wife's husband died. So, Mrs. Berard, hello, sir, was in somewhat dire straits, no income or whatever, Mr. Root. And this man took care of her from money he was making as a hairdresser. So Pierre Toussaint took care of his slave mistress, you might say, from his income. In 1807, Mrs. Berard finally died, and Pierre Toussaint finally got his freedom. after her death. And what did he do with his money to help people? He freed other slaves. He would buy their freedom because you could purchase your freedom and become a freedman. So he would do that. He never did that for himself, though. He never bought his own freedom from the Burrard family. He did it for other blacks. But for some reason, he never did it for himself. Maybe he thought maybe he thought it was selfish. I don't know. I'd have to, whatever. But maybe he thought his money was better used helping other people rather than helping himself first. But he helped others to free them from slavery. He helped orphans, children that didn't have a mother or father. He used his money to fund schools for black kids. Again, during this period of time and for a long time in American history, educating non-white people was not high on the list of to-do things, especially blacks. So they had to help themselves. So he used his money to found schools for black children. He also helped found the first French church in New York City. Remember, I talked about national parishes. So he felt that there was a need for French-speaking Catholics in New York City to have a place where they could go. And of course, he was from Haiti, which was under part of the French Empire until there was the revolt, and is still French as the official language of Haiti, but really everyone speaks Haitian Creole, which is a language that's based on French. It's a very beautiful language, Creole. I wish I could speak it. But anyways, it fascinates me. But anyways, so he spoke French. So he founded a French church for French-speaking Catholics in the city. And as I said, he was. Oh, hold on a second. Oh, okay. He was a hairdresser, and he was a hairdresser to a man who was the president of Columbia University. Columbia is one of the Ivy League schools. It's one of the oldest schools in the country. I believe New York. It is in New York City, yes. Columbia, and apparently in the neighborhood, he knew the president and did the hair for his wife, and they became friends. And the president of the university, this man named Nathaniel Fish Moore, was kind of a camera buff because it was new technology. He was fascinated by photography because it was a new technology in the 1800s, later 1800s, where they figured out how to put images on film and stuff like that. And so he actually took this picture, the president of Columbia University took this picture, early picture, okay, I think maybe it's called a daguerreotype or something like that. It's an early form of photography. Took this picture of Pierre Toussaint there at a table, scowling. Like, come on, dude, you're a saint, be happy. I'm a black holy man. No, I guess you have to be serious to be a saint, Anyways, but there he is in his beautiful glory, Pierre Toussaint. And yes, he's still venerable. He's been venerable for a while. He's one of my. I love him as a saint. He's one of my favorite saints. I don't know why hasn't moved up the rung over the years, but he just hasn't. I hope he does, and I ask for your prayers, Venerable Pierre. Please pray for us, and in this class that we will do well. Amen. You gotta come in here. Come on. There you go. All right. Let's see here. Who should I ask? Ms. Nice. Ms. Nice, how are you? Doing well. A little tired, but I'll get it. Hopefully you'll be well in a few minutes. So, Ms. Nice, I'm assuming that You've read by now the Gospels of Mark and Matthew. So my question is, from your reading, why do you think Jesus of Nazareth died? Why was he killed?
Because of the fraud and not behind his belief.
Okay, good. Good. That's a good answer. A good opening answer. What do you mean by claim? Who was Jesus claiming to be?
Well, I guess he never claimed to be anyone. He didn't claim to be the Son of God. But
Okay.
that's what people perceived him as. And in his ministry, such. I guess he thought that it was blasphemous thinking.
Okay. It was blasphemous who was claiming to be the Son of God.
Well, I guess he didn't technically be his son, but that's what he
Oh, he didn't? He never called himself the Son and God as his Father? Well, what do the Gospels say? What does Mark say? What does Matthew say? That's a good answer. No, I like that. Yeah, that's a good answer. Can anyone add to it from your reading of the Gospels? Did Jesus ever refer to God as his Father? Or to himself as the Son? Mr. Scott?
Yeah, it's his.
Okay, the Gospel of John, Mr. Scott.
Yeah. So I.
Okay. But does that come from the Gospel of Mark or from the Gospel of Matthew? No, it isn't. That's good. You're right. In the Gospel of John, it's very clear. But I just want to focus on our readings. Jesus referred to himself as that in those two Gospels. You're actually trying to look it up, Mr. Martin? What are you doing?
Well, no, it says. It's the only way I'm gonna find out.
You can't help some people. You just can't. I tried, but.
It was gotta give it an attempt.
Try this film? Try this film. Try it. Then again, this man is in his Bible. You know, I see other people's Bibles on your computer, the Bible's out. And at least you search. You got John. Okay, so that might be but you say it was nice that Jesus really didn't say that. He didn't. That's what I'm understanding you're saying. Jesus really didn't claim that. So he was killed for wrongly or unjustly. You think so?
Yeah.
Okay. Wrong place, wrong time, or just people misunderstood him. He wasn't really saying that.
Yeah.
Okay. Why don't the Gospels record that? Why don't they record Jesus saying, "Wait a second, you people seem to be understanding me in this way, but I'm not." Why didn't it just very clear? Why didn't Jesus clear the air? Yes, Mr. Plunkett.
He's fulfilling God's plan.
Okay, what do you think he thought God's plan for him was?
To die for our sins and save us all from or at
So,
least give us the chance to be forgiven.
okay. Die for everything. So do you think it was okay for Jesus to allow people to misunderstand him as long as it was fulfilling God's plan? Like he was really just a human being, he wasn't God's son. Maybe he wasn't even the Messiah. Okay? But that's okay because he needed to die for the sins of the world.
I mean, he did try. He spread the gospel. People didn't understand what he was telling them. It's not really his fault because he did his best.
Okay. So in telling the gospel did not include any claims to divinity or even messiahship. Is that what you're saying? People just misunderstood that, but he still was
I mean, some people misunderstood it like he was.
Okay. They put him to death because they thought he was God.
Like that because I guess they were afraid of what he was saying and they didn't want to take place the truth.
All right.
They didn't really believe it.
Love your neighbor. That's revolutionary. Do good to other people. Don't tell lies. Those are revolutionary statements. Those are things that get you hung on a cross.
I mean, I don't think that got him hung on a cross. I think saying that he was God.
Oh, okay, that he was the Son of God. Well, but Ms. Nice says that he probably didn't say that. People misunderstood that.
I think that was the point of his.
All right, give you some examples from the Gospel of Mark or the Gospel of Matthew. Yes, Mark.
I'd say it's more or less the reason why he was so like upright. I mean, not like he's obviously God. But like because like they were against like their teachings, they didn't want to like they were upset. They were trying to deny like their teachings.
Jesus was denying their teaching?
Not denying their teachings, but like in a way they thought, oh, this guy's he read religion, and we have our religion that's here already. This guy he is pretty much.
Yeah, what was his purpose?
Yeah.
He's a Jew, right? He's a Jew and he's a teacher.
I mean, but I kind of like honestly, it wasn't enough to like deserve enough to like get him crucified per se. Because he was a murderer, if I remember correctly. I don't remember. He was like he was like again facing him in a murder.
Oh, okay, yes, that's true. Barabbas.
Yeah.
Barabbas. Who might have also been named Jesus. It's pretty interesting.
I personally never understood it because it was just like even if like someone claimed to be God, if you're willing to like let someone who took a life do it again, it's just a little confusing.
Okay. I agree with you. It's not necessarily completely clear. Mr. Cruz, which is appropriate, Mr. Cruz, because your name means cross. Why did Jesus go to the cross? What did Jesus do specifically? What did Jesus say that people would want him dead? Come on, he healed lepers. He cast out demons, right? For all intents and purposes, from the story, he seemed like just a nice guy doing good things, apparently. And he was a teacher. He was a teacher. But apparently he wasn't teaching the truth. As at least the Jewish authorities thought, I guess. They wanted. Then why would you want this guy dead? What is he doing?
Didn't they think that was like saying he was the king of the Jews?
Yeah, it was Messiah, the Christ, right? The king of he was the ruler of the Jews. Okay. But that's not a claim to God, is it? Being God, is it? I mean, claiming to be the proper king, the true ruler of the people. Does that necessarily claim to divinity or some supernatural stuff? Huh?
I guess not.
Well, it could be, but not necessarily. Yeah, Mr. Bellamy.
At that time, where they like followed a whole bunch of different religious
The Jews?
every
Oh, well, yeah, human beings were, but not the Jews. No, there was only one God the Jews followed, yes. Yes, other nations as well, other groups of people, yeah, have many gods and many spirits. The Jews were unique in that sense that they only followed their one God, and that was the God of existence. They weren't always like that, and that took a long time to develop. Okay. I mean, it's kind of like saying, I'm the president of the United States. I'm not, but let's say I think I am. And I want to, you people should pay your taxes to me and do what I tell you to do. But that's not really what the president's about. Congress just tells you what to do, I guess. Yeah, I might think I'm nutty. I'm a goofball. But do you want to kill me? Do I deserve death for that? I don't think necessarily. So Jesus saying that he's the Messiah, okay, you might think that Jesus is incorrect. He's mistaken. or he's right. Some people he might get some followers, And we do know from the time of Jesus, I got you, Mr. Bellamy, I'll come back to you in a second. We do know from historical records, and some of them are even mentioned in the New Testament, that there were some other people around the time of Jesus who claimed to be the Messiah or claimed to were revolutionaries and wanted to overthrow the Romans. And their groups, went away, or the Romans killed their leaders, and they went away, But the Jews, the Jewish leadership, they didn't care. They weren't involved with these people. But here we have the Jews, because the Romans, remember, who arrests Jesus? Not the Romans. The Romans don't go out looking for Jesus. We got to find this Jesus guy who's claiming to be a Messiah. It's the Sanhedrin, the religious leadership, that take the initiative, say, we have to arrest him and get rid of him. Mr. Bellamy, yes.
Based on the authority. Not necessarily that he was claiming to be the Messiah, but because he was doing all like the miracles and stuff. That's why they wanted.
But why would that scare anybody? So Jesus had power. I mean, Jesus could raise the dead or something. Maybe too much. They thought he was going to get too much power.
Well, no, they have to know what the part of God. So then, like, this outside person has, and then it's like taking authority destroys their religions.
Okay. But he's not an outside person. He's a Jew. And we have examples of people performing, prophets in the Old Testament performing miracles, even raising people from the dead. It was not totally unheard of amongst the Jews. We have examples. I get your point. Yeah, Yes, Miss Mansour. Yeah, why would they think that though? Why wouldn't they think that, they were coming from God if people thought he was a good man? Not everyone thought. Why didn't they think he was a good person? Okay. Ah, you're speaking my language. But again, Messiah is simply a king, a ruler, not necessarily a divine figure.
You never said he was.
He didn't. Oh, okay. Which good is ambiguous. It could be interpreted as just, well, we'll get into that later, but okay, that's a good point to make, actually. All right. So I'm trying to get you to think about your reading, if you did it. But whatever. I'm hoping that you did it. Why would the Gospels record that Jesus was known as a blasphemer? I mean, the Gospels, these writings were written by Christians, yes? So presumably they're pro-Jesus, right? They're on the side of Jesus, aren't they? Would you imagine? They're not written by his enemies. Can we agree with that, Ms. Free-J, that they're not written on people who are trying to trash Jesus' reputation? It's Free-J, right? That's Free-J. Well, a little bit of a smile. So if they're written by people who are propagandists for Jesus, they're on the side of Jesus, A, why would they tell you that people thought Jesus was a bad man? Why would they B, why would they say Jesus was a blasphemer, accused of being a blasphemer? Well, why include those things? What's the point of that?
Because full story of like what everyone else thought too about it, like the so that you could better understand what was happening like in the moment.
Okay, well that's interesting. Understand why some people wanted Jesus dead. Maybe understand why some people, because that is a question. Why did Jesus die? Why did Jesus die? If Jesus was a good man, which he seems to have been, for the most part, or at least, he was a mistaken man if he thought he was the Messiah and he really wasn't. Even if he thought he was the Son of God and he really wasn't, you could say he was mistaken or mentally ill or something like that. That doesn't necessarily mean you want to kill the person. I mean, that's kind of an extreme response necessarily, unless the person is serious. And as time goes on, you start to realize, this dude really thinks this. That's a problem. So why did Jesus die? Well, the long and the short of the answer is, and maybe you'll know this when you read the Gospel, but we don't really know. The Gospels don't tell us specifically why Jesus was crucified. For the first thing we need to point out, because I think it still comes up even today, is that when we talk about the Jews, you have to separate the Jews as a group from the people at the time of Jesus. Jesus was a Jew, of course, yes? His followers were Jews. Parents were Jews, or I should say parent was Jew. Although God is the God of the Jews, so you could say it in a sense. As far as we know, the 12 apostles were Jews. The writer Paul was a Jew. The writers of the New Testament were Jews. So we can't really, when people, sometimes you'll see on the internet, the Jews killed Jesus. It was the Jews who are responsible for the death of Jesus. Well, it's not exactly true, because some Jews followed Jesus and believed in him. So it's not proper really to say that, the Jews killed Jesus any more than it's proper to say that because it was the Romans that actually had Jesus executed, that all Italians killed Jesus, because the Romans are from Rome, which is in Italy. They were Italians for the most part. So you don't blame the Italians. You don't say the Italians are Christ killers or something like that. It makes no sense. And the same thing with the Jewish people. Some people believed in Jesus. Some people didn't. Some people wanted him dead. There are probably I would imagine there are a lot of people who didn't even know who Jesus was. You can't imagine that everyone knew who Jesus of Nazareth was, who had no connection to the crucifixion. They didn't even know who this guy was. Although it does seem that, at least in the Gospels, that many of the Jewish leadership, the religious people, had a problem with Jesus and rejected him and wanted him condemned. So why was he executed? Well, if you read Mark, you read Matthew, and also if you continue on and read Luke and John, the other two Gospels, and complete the series. It's like reading all the Harry Potter books. Did anyone read all the Harry Potter books? Anyone? You got through them all? Yet the Bible is not even like half of all. If you stack up all the Harry Potter books on a shelf, and then you put like a Bible next to it, and if I ask someone, how many people here have read the whole Bible? Like 0. Well, except for me. But I'm different. I'm weird, Mr. Urban. Yeah. We don't know. There are different reasons. And there are different reasons based on whichever group it is. For the Jews, for the religious leadership, there are a number of things. As I mentioned, Jesus is a violator of God's law. Jesus, that's one of the reasons that we find. And I mentioned this before. Why was there opposition to Jesus? Jesus thinks that he can reinterpret the law of God, which comes from God. So, no, it's not necessarily Jesus saying, I'm divine, but it does seem to be a claim to divinity in some sense. Jesus, a man, is claiming that he can decide what Jewish law is and how it should be followed, law that comes directly from God himself. So he can kind of override God's interpretation of what the Jews are supposed to do, how it's an authentic Jewish life to live. No, do what I tell you to do. He claimed to be able to destroy and rebuild the temple. That's interesting. We'll come back to that. Okay, so that's kind of an attack on God's house, the house of God, where God lives on earth amongst the Jews, lived on earth amongst the Jews, the temple in Jerusalem, the temple building. So that's significant. That could be considered blasphemous, showing disrespect to God when you say, I'm going to destroy his house. Or Jesus didn't say, I'm going to destroy it, but if you destroy the house of God, I can rebuild it. He does claim to be God's son. Here it is, Mark chapter 14, and parallels. Yes, Mr. Scott, also John, the gospel, all throughout the Gospel of John. John really emphasizes that aspect. Mark, not so much, but it is there. Jesus describes God as his Father, and he doesn't seem to mean, now he could mean that, God's my Father in the sense that we're all God's children, just like you learned in CCD, or you learned in Bible study, or you learned in your Sunday school. We're all God's sons and daughters. I'm 52 years old, and I stand here for like over 2 hours. I don't have to go to the bathroom. You people are like 20. You're like almost in the prime of your life, if not. And you got bladders like 60-year-olds. You're always getting... Come on, that was a little bit humorous, right, Miss Free J? Come on, give me something. Ah, Miss Free J. Anywho. So yeah, Jesus could mean he's the Son of God in the sense that, oh yeah, like I'm a child of God, God loves me and stuff like that. Okay, fine. That doesn't get you killed. I don't think that gets you killed. People, if people are understanding, that's what you said. But as some of you in the class pointed out, Jesus seems to have been misunderstood in some sense. Like he's meaning more in the sense that I'm just like a child of God, God loves me, as like I have a real, literal, familial relationship with the one God of the Jews. Well, okay, maybe Jesus didn't mean that, but how was he misunderstood then? Because he could have very easily cleared it up through clarification. Could have always said, no, there's only one God we Jews worship. But he doesn't. Why does he allow people to continue with that misunderstanding? Okay, so he claims that this is an interesting. He raises a man from the dead. This is in the Gospel of John. I just throw it out there. I have no clue why that caused such consternation, but that seems to be the reason in the Gospel of John. Jesus raises this man Lazarus from the grave. Jesus had apparently done to other people, but there's something about this raising from the dead which really gets the Sanhedrin or the religious leaders in a bunch, and they even call a special meeting and like, what are we going to do about Jesus? He's raising the dead. Okay. Proclaiming himself the Messiah. All right, the Christ promised by God, not necessarily a claim to divinity. Would you kill him over it? Well, maybe if you thought, it's going to cause trouble with the Romans, you might want to, they might have wanted to arrest him and hand him over to the Romans because, it's better that you get rid of this false Messiah, this goofy guy who thinks he's the king of the Jews, than have the Romans take it seriously and like unleash themselves militarily on the people. Okay, you might just want to get rid of him. Possible. But it's not really a blasphemous claim. It's not an offense against God. He's wrong. And there have been other Jews throughout Jewish history who've claimed to be the Messiah. They weren't considered blasphemers. They're just wrong. That wasn't a reason to get him killed, necessarily. At least from the Jewish perspective. From the Roman perspective, yes. Okay. So Jesus is arrested, and he's brought before the Sanhedrin, the Sunhedrion, which means a place that people being seated around, sunhedradzo, to be seated. Okay, so like a council where any council where you sit around in a judgment. Okay, and that's what the Sanhedrin was. It was a supreme religious council that made decisions relevant to Jewish law and practice. So notice that the political entities don't get involved. It's the religious entities. So that at least tells us something about why Jesus was dangerous. Okay, he is making religious, what are perceived to be religious claims, claims that strike at the heart of Judaism, not necessarily political claims. For the Romans, I gave you this. Actually, no. I'll give you this definition. The Messiah, what is the Messiah? The Messiah is a ruler, I've mentioned it before, king warrior or king savior. He's supposed to be descended from King David, an ancient king of the Jews, who would restore the ancient Jewish kingdom, defeat the enemies of Israel, and establish a reign of peace forever, I should say, based on the following of God's law. And I'll talk more about Jesus' messiahship later on when we talk about who is Jesus, God willing. So this king figure, ruler figure, who's supposed to come in the future and reestablish a political entity, but also there's a religious element, that he would establish the perfect following of the Jewish religion. Okay, who would like to read this from the trial of Jesus that's recorded in the Gospel of Mark? Anybody? Miss Fennell, I got you. Miss Fennell, do you want to read it? No? Well, at least you're honest, Miss Fennell. God bless you. Okay, Miss Donnelly, go ahead.
Jesus to death, but they found none. Some took the stand and testified falsely against, alleging, "We heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with hands, and within 3 days I will build another not made with hands." The high priest rose before the assembly and questioned Jesus, saying, "Have you no answer? What are these men testifying against you?" But he was silent, answering. Again, the high priest asked him and said to him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?" Then Jesus answered, "I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power and coming with the clouds of heaven." At that, the high priest tore his garments and said, "What further need have we of witnesses? You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" They all condemned him as deserving to die.
Excellent. Get out your Bible, please. Turn to the Gospel of John. Gospel of John. Yes. Chapter 1, I think. 1. It's chapter 2. Sorry, it's chapter 2, starting with verse 13. So John chapter 2, verse 13, Mr. Lattimore. Yes. Good. Oh, Mr. Mexcativa. The graves of wrath are stored. This calm marching on. You've got it. Who wants to read it? Verse 13. You want to read it, Ms. Dalton? No? All right, let's go. Does anyone want to read beginning of verse 13? Go ahead, Mr. Scott.
Was it introduced to the temple is now the Passover appears in that hand, shout out to the Jews. They found him in the temple roads, he was sold outside of sheep and goats, and the money changed. When he had made a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple, sheep and the oxen, and poured out changers' money, and overturned the tables. And he said to those who sold doves, "Take these things away, do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise." When his disciples remembered that it was written, "What for your house has he out?" So the Jews answered and said to him, "What sign do you show us, since you do these things?" Jesus answered and said to them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Then the Jews said, it is taking 46 years to build this temple, and he will raise it up in 3 days. But he was speaking of the temple of his body. Therefore, if he had risen from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this to them, and they believed the scripture Jesus had said.
Excellent, that's fine, sir. Translation is that, sir? You mind me asking? Looking at you. No, I'm curious. Man, oh, this is your baby Bible from your baptism? Oh, God bless you, sir. Precious. God bless. So you're baptized on what, May 6th, 2006? You got to say that. Oh, okay, it's the New King James Version. Oh, very nice. I'm just curious, well, it says St. Anne, assuming it's a Catholic church, or, okay, the New King James Version. Interesting. There you go. Excellent, sir. No, it's a fine translation. Okay. Come to that in a moment. Keep that in your memory, what we just read. So Jesus is arrested and he's brought before the Sanhedrin, the county Sanhedrin. And notice what Mark says. They're trying to obtain witness against Jesus so that they could put him to death. So it's already kind of like a kangaroo court. It's a rigged court. They want to find somebody to give them some evidence of something Jesus did that is death-worthy. Okay, at least according to Mark. Remember, this is pro-Jesus. So Mark's in favor of Jesus. So from his mind, Jesus is completely innocent. And they're just trying to find a reason to condemn him. All right? But they could find none. Which, if I'm reading between the lines, and assuming that this is an accurate account of something that happened, that actually tells me something about the Sanhedrin. It tells me that they were sincere. The impression you might get is that they were unjust judges. They were trying to find anything to put Jesus away. Well, if you want to find evidence to put someone away, you don't really need much, do you, Ms. Westergaard? Well, you need something, and then the judge says, that's good enough for me. Off you go. But Mark tells us they couldn't find any. Which, as I said, if you're reading between the lines, kind of means they were honest. They don't just want to get Jesus on trumped up charges. They knew Jesus had said and done things that were probably death worthy. That's why he's there. But they needed witnesses. That was because they had to fulfill the law. The law of God said testimony has to be substantiated by at least 2 witnesses. 1 witness isn't enough. So apparently they're trying to follow the rules. They're trying to give Jesus kind of a fair trial. But then a couple of people stand up, or someone stood up, and testified falsely, Mark tells us, against Jesus, saying, we heard Jesus say, I'll destroy the temple made with hands, and in 3 days I'll build another. I'll build it back up. You've read the Gospel of Mark. Does Jesus say that in the Gospel of Mark? Where does Jesus say that? What's the context? Where does Jesus make that claim? Miss Plunkett! You're smiling. Yes. Do you know? No. That's Zabda Malak. Do you know where in the Gospel of Mark Jesus, you can search, you got stuff on your computer, let's take a search. Where does Jesus threaten to destroy or have the temple destroyed and then rebuild it? How you doing, Mom? Yes. It took, where Jesus said that, took place in Jerusalem? Well, yeah, okay, yes, that's good. It was in the Jerusalem temple that Jesus apparently said these words. All right, stop. It's a trick question. I tricked you. You will go cuckoo, Mr. Cruz, trying to find anywhere in the Gospel of Mark where Jesus says these words. They are nowhere in the Gospel of Mark. So I guess Mark can say they were actually testifying falsely, because if Jesus never said it, right, in Westergom, then it is false. If Mark doesn't report it as Jesus having said this at all, made this claim at all. I mean, in Mark's gospel, Jesus does go to the temple. He does, drive people. He gets angry by the business he sees, faces the desecration of the temple. He does drive the money changers out, but he never says this. Never says anything. He never offends the temple or criticizes the temple, right? Huh?
He doesn't.
He doesn't? Ever? Really? Nowhere? No Christian remembers this? Okay, now go back into your memory in the last 5 minutes. Anything, Mr. Walmer? Nothing's coming? You don't see an issue here? No one sees an issue. Does Jesus actually say this?
No.
No. Who said that? Who's that? That was Mr. Martin. How do you know that, Mr. Martin?
I mean, like, it could be like, I don't think he necessarily said it. And I feel like it sounds like something that like that he didn't necessarily said. It's just something that he would say would take me out of context.
Okay. Why do you think that?
I'd say that because while he probably didn't say it, it's Mark writing this, so we know it could be lying about it.
Yeah. Could be misrepresenting.
We don't know. But
Although, if he's lying about it, then we can't really trust anything he said about Jesus, right?
yeah.
Even the good stuff. Mr. Scott, you have anything to say? Nothing? Nothing. I don't get paid. I'm trying, Mr. Cruz. I'm working, I'm trying. Okay, what did we just read in the last 5 minutes or so, Ms. Wamaldorf?
You're asking if he says it at all, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, he says it in John.
Oh!
2.
Didn't we just read? Oh yeah, there's the Gospel of John, right? Yeah, John chapter 2. John is a Christian, right? He's recording the words of Jesus, and when Jesus goes to the temple, right? What does Jesus say? Read it again, Mr. Scott. The words of Jesus. What does he say about the temple, Mr. Scott? No, sorry. Did you want to read it?
No, I just haven't answered the question.
Okay, hold on a second. Let's see what happens.
You know, start again.
Nope. Just read what Jesus says about the temple. What he's going to do, what can happen to the temple.
Says,
Okay.
um,
We'll get there, Miss. Get there. Jesus returned. We'll get there.
now the house of Jews I am you. My house is
No.
temple.
No. Just to go.
And he said to those who sold doves, take these things away.
Okay, skip over that.
So the Jews answered and said to him, what sign do you show us since you do these things? Jesus answered and said, choice of one days over is done. Did you say?
Okay, that's fine. But Mr. Wilmer, what did you want to say?
I was gonna say.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you, Mr. Wilmer. So Mr. Wilmer, you got it as well. So Jesus does say this, apparently. Jesus makes some claim, maybe it was misinterpreted, but here we have a Christian giving it, not his enemies, okay? And also interpreting it for us, saying Jesus, no, Jesus didn't really mean that you physically destroy the temple building. He's talking about the resurrection. His body, the temple of his body would be destroyed by crucifixion, but it would be raised again in 3 days. That's what Christians later understood it to mean. But apparently people did not understand it at that time, immediately. It comes later. John even tells us it came later. It was after Jesus was raised from the dead. Well, that happens in like John chapter 19, chapter 20, right? And this is chapter 2. So, obviously it took some time. Even his believers didn't maybe necessarily know what Jesus meant by that. Was he actually attacking the temple? But he appears to be. So here we have an independent tradition in John's gospel which confirms what Mark tells us from the trial. So these witnesses were not testifying falsely. Jesus said something like this. Okay? Whether Mark knows about it or not, we don't know, but he does. But it's not in Mark's gospel at all. It's not in Matthew's gospel. It's not in Luke's gospel. None of them had it. Only John preserves this. So we know that Jesus did something in the temple and made a claim to destroying the temple and rebuilding it. Now that could get you killed, as I said. But that doesn't seem to really concern the high priest or the Sanhedrin too much. He says, have you no answer to this? And Jesus doesn't answer, which is always good. Take the fifth. Remain silent. He doesn't have to answer, and he doesn't answer. But notice how the high priest doesn't continue the conversation about it. He doesn't go after this. All right? He says, I ask you, are you the Messiah? Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? That's his concern. Not even that Jesus may have made an attack on the temple. Pass that by, right? Are you claiming to be the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? And this is exactly how a Jew would probably say it, because Jews even today, very religious Jews, avoid using the word God. They call God the name or the power, and they use circumlocutions. And that's exactly what the high priest does here. Are you the Son of God or the Son of the Blessed One? And Jesus responds, I am. Now this is interesting. Only Mark recorded this in Jesus' response. In the Greek, it's very interesting. It's ego eimi. It means just I am, period. Which could be translated simply, I am he. Yes, Jesus is frankly saying, I am the Messiah. But again, saying that you're the King of the Jews that's a political statement, not really a doctrinal or religious statement. But the way he says it in Greek is interesting. Because this is the name of God. When God reveals himself to Moses and Moses says, tell me your name. I want to know the name you use. God says, my name is I am who I am. Which might be a way of saying, I don't want to tell you. But that's what it says. Okay. Ego eimi in the Greek translation. All right. So this is very interesting because it's ambiguous. Jesus doesn't come out, this is one of those things where I'm reading the text and I'm like, Jesus, at this moment, this is not the time to be coy. This is not the time to be ambiguous, Jesus. You're playing with your life. This is the time to be very clear. And he's not, apparently. He still is like, I am, which can mean, sure, I am the Messiah, which is also problematic if he's not. But I am, he's using the name of God and applying it to himself. And he continues. He could have just left it ambiguous. But it's kind of like, no, Jesus, why can't you stay silent now? No, Jesus has to continue talking. You will see the Son of Man, meaning me, seated at the right hand of the power, meaning God. Again, Jews don't typically refer to God out of respect. So you see me at the right hand of God, and I'll be coming on the clouds of heaven. Now, Jesus is quoting scripture here. We'll talk about that from the book of Daniel. We'll talk about that in a later class. But, this is, Jesus kind of like explains what he means. I'm more than just the Messiah. I am almost equal to God. I'm sitting at God's right hand. He's not the same as God. There's some distinction there. But I'm at God's right hand, okay, which means, usually the person who sat at the king's right hand was the most powerful person, the most person closely connected to the king. So I'm the one who's most closely connected to God. Remember, this is a woodworker from Nazareth, from nowhere, Galilee, Guy who's no better than a beggar. He's claiming this. And I'm going to come on the clouds of heaven. In glory, apparently. The clouds of heaven are a sign of glory. All right. Now, what's the reaction of the high priest? Because, some scholars might look at that and say, well, that's not really a claim to divinity. Jesus is just claiming to be the Messiah, or claiming, whatever. But we have to look at what the reaction of his hearers, his listeners is. The high priest tears his robe, which is, and you have to understand the culture, because other people, if you read the Bible, there are instances where people do tear their robes. Usually it's a sign of grief or a sign of anger. In this case, I'm going to assume it's a sign of grief. Or excuse me, I'm going to assume it's a sign of anger. But he tears, on hearing what Jesus says, he tears his robe and says, we don't even need witnesses anymore, because we all just heard what he said, right? So we don't even have to go through the process anymore. We have more than 2 witnesses. All of us here in the Council of Sanhedrin, you heard what he said, didn't you? Yes. You've heard the blasphemy. So what does the law say is the penalty for blasphemy in the Jewish law? It's stoning to death. They can't stone Jesus because they don't have that power. So they have to hand him over to the next best thing, which is the Romans. Okay. Now, as you might imagine, for Pontius Pilate, probably he didn't care about the religious issues. Okay, he was a pagan. Pagans had stories about gods having sex with human women and fathering children who are half God, half human, stuff like that. So that, if Jesus were claiming that probably wouldn't have surprised him at all. But if Jesus were claiming to be the Messiah, that would have interested him, because that was then a political challenge to the Roman emperor. And that's how the Jewish leaders phrase it. They don't bring Jesus to Pilate and say, he's claiming to be God, he has to die. Actually, they do in the Gospel of John. That's John's focus. The leaders say, he's claiming to be God's son, so according to our law, he has to die. But Pilate's response is exactly what you would expect. He's like, I don't care. It has nothing to do with me. What political crime has he committed? All right. So that's the tack that they then use, and that we find, for example, in the Gospel of Luke, when they bring him to, because, in the Gospel of Mark doesn't really make explicit what the Sanhedrin leaders say to Pilate. They just hand Jesus over. But in Luke, we get a few more details. We found this man misleading our people. He doesn't want people to pay taxes. Oh, yes. When money is involved in the government, yes, you can get into a whole lot of pain. And he's maintaining he is the Christ, a king. And so this is interesting, because they have to explain it to Pilate what the Christ is, the Messiah, because it's a Jewish concept. Pilate wouldn't know. He's not a Jew. So they explain what it means. He's a Messiah, which is a king. He's claiming he's a ruler. And that's Pilate's interest. We'll move past this. Don't worry about it. Are you the king of the Jews? And all the portrayals of the trial that we have, that's the main question Pilate has, which is probably accurate, I would say. not religious questions, but political. Are you the king of the Jews? And whatever Jesus says to Pilate, again, apparently it's not good enough to make Pilate think that that's not what Jesus thinks that he is. And so he has Jesus crucified. I mean, the Gospels will tell you that, Pilate didn't think Jesus was really guilty. And so, okay, that's fine. But if Pilate really didn't think Jesus was guilty, he had full executive power. He just let Jesus go. He didn't have to do anything to Jesus. He really thought it was nothing. This was a nothing burger and whatever, because he didn't care about appeasing the Jewish leaders. He didn't like the Jews from what we know about his character. He liked antagonizing them. So, he didn't have to do a solid for the Jewish leadership and say, yeah, okay, I'll get rid of your guy for you. But he does, which, again, if you're reading between the lines, it means that even Pilate seemed to think Jesus was some threat of some kind. And Mr. Martin said he was even willing to release a murderer, an actual revolutionary who's trying to overthrow the Romans to get rid of Jesus. So Jesus, are you the king of the Jews, Jesus? And that's apparently what gets Jesus killed from the Roman side. Because if you read the Gospel of Mark, what does the titulus say? What does the titulus say on the cross? He said titulus, right, Mr. Urban? Yeah, it's like little Family Guy humor there. What does the titulus say? Well, you have to know what the titulus is, right? He's happy to be listening fast. Yes, Mr. Bellamy.
It says, here's the king, the truth.
Yes, the charge over the head of Jesus is, this is the king of the Jews. That's why he was killed. That's why the Romans killed him. So that gives us pretty good evidence of what was going on in Pilate's mind for the Romans. And look even here. We have this building in Jerusalem, 2001. They were excavating. It used to be a prison, Turkish prison, when it was under the control of the Ottoman Empire. Israel was under control of the Ottoman Empire. So this building is not from the time of Jesus, but the foundations are. They found out through archaeological excavation that the foundations of this building actually do date from the time of Jesus, that this later building was built on, whatever. What's interesting about this is that they seem pretty sure, the archaeologists, that the foundations are from what's called the Praetorium, which was, kind of like the office building that the Roman governor would stay in Jerusalem. Okay? The governor wasn't in Jerusalem, even though that was a large city. He would stay up on the coast in Caesarea, I think, on the coast. But anyways, during major feasts and stuff, when there were going to be a lot of people in Jerusalem and you wanted to make sure that you kept the peace, kept an eye on everybody, the governor would travel down and stay in the Praetorium in Jerusalem. And that's what we're told throughout the story of Jesus. That's what Jesus is taken for his trial with Pilate. We're not sure exactly what a Praetorium was. Well, anyway, the historical, where a Praetorium comes from, it used to be a tent that generals would live in with their armies and stuff like that. And then it became the building where the main, general or the main political leader of the Romans would live. Okay? So this is, it's not the actual building because you just have the foundations. But this is the site, apparently, where all this happened with Pilate, where Jesus of Nazareth was brought in and tried before this man Pontius Pilate. But it doesn't, as I told you in the last class, it doesn't end there. There's more to the story. The resurrection changes everything. The claim by Jesus' followers, some of them, not all of them, some of them, that they have seen Jesus bodily. Jesus, who had actually died, really died, had been brought back to life by God in his body. And this changes everything. And if you don't understand this essential fact, then you really won't understand Christianity or anything else. Because there were many, as I think, as we're trying to tease out, and I'm trying to tease things out of your head and get you to think about the stories that you've read about Jesus in Mark and Matthew, I think you can see, and even in the Gospel of John, where John tells us, Mr. Scott, right, that the disciples didn't really achieve a full understanding about that statement of Jesus until after he rose from the dead. So he had to go through the rest of his ministry, his arrest, his crucifixion. Who knows what they thought Jesus meant, what he was going to do. So whatever his followers might have thought of him, maybe he was a prophet, maybe he was the Messiah, maybe he was just a rabbi, a religious teacher, or a miracle worker, Maybe Jesus was a failure. There seem to be indications of that in the Gospels, that some of his followers just thought Jesus was a mistake. Even some of the apostles, the 12 apostles, because they go back to fishing. They go back to their jobs. They go back home after Jesus is dead. But after the resurrection, they can't understand Jesus in the same way. All those things get reinterpreted by the resurrection. All of his actions and his statements that seem to be messianic, or even claims to divinity, to godhood, now, with the resurrection, apparently start to seem to make sense to them, become understandable. And so that's the point of the writings. And you see this throughout the writing. I mean, Mark assumes Jesus is God throughout his gospel. He doesn't show you how he comes to that conclusion in the gospel. That's not his point in the gospel. His point is to bring you to faith as well, or to express the faith, the Christian faith. But he already from the beginning, even though he doesn't emphasize it so much, he clearly believes that Jesus is more than just a human being. But the only reason he doesn't believe that because Jesus died on the cross, even for his sins. Because Ms. Plunkett, if Jesus is just a man, what does his death have to do with my sins? Or the sins of the billions of people who have been on this planet? One man wipes out all the sins of everybody always? Well, forget about it. How do you know that? Well, let's hope he is. Let's hope he is. Because if he is just a man and he died tragically, but that's not the end of the story for Mark. It's the empty tomb. That's why he believes in Jesus. Not because, even though you see crosses all over the place, not because Jesus was hanged on a cross and died, even for the sins of the world. It's because he was raised bodily from the dead. If that didn't happen, you don't have Christianity. You don't. You might have still a little sect within Judaism, honoring this man, Jesus, who they thought was the Messiah. And, maybe you could have developed the belief that, yeah, Jesus really was the Messiah and he's glorified now with God in heaven. He died, but, you can't deny that. But he's in heaven with God. You don't need to make up a resurrection. There are other ways to get around that, even easier ways. Jesus just was assumed up into heaven, his body was taken up into heaven by God. That's why the body wasn't there. No, Jesus didn't really appear to people, but he did in glory from his place in heaven at the right hand of God. It's already right there. It's ready made. You don't need to go to the extreme of claiming that, no, I actually saw him alive again in his flesh, which is the most extreme claim you could make. And also, it didn't make sense to anybody. It didn't make sense to Jews. It didn't make sense to non-Jews. Why? Well, for Jews, because the resurrection of the dead was a late belief, a developing belief, even at the time of Jesus. We know this from ancient Jewish writings from before the time of Jesus and around the time of Jesus. Not all Jews believed in the resurrection of the dead. It wasn't a common belief. Most of the priests in the temple who had been in the Sanhedrin did not believe in the resurrection of the body, of anyone's body. Okay? This idea that there would be a general judgment at the end of time by God, and that all the righteous would be raised up in their bodies. This is a late developing belief in Judaism. And so you see it in later Jewish writings. If you have a Catholic Bible, you see it, for example, with the second book of Maccabees.
very clearly. But if you read earlier Jewish writings, Job is an ancient Jewish writing, it's not present at all. The Jews didn't believe really in an afterlife as such. Sheol, or the afterlife, was was under the earth, it was in the ground, it was a dark place, and we were barely existing. Even God wasn't really present there, so you couldn't pray to God through Sheol or with that. And everyone went there, good, bad, and indifferent. That's just where you went. You went into the earth. Back into the earth. And that's how a lot of the Greeks and the Romans pictured it as well, There was just this dark cave, this huge dark cave under the earth where everybody went. There was a lower bit where there was fire and pain for really, really bad people, but most people were in the dark cave. And you never came back. No one could escape. Hades, as they call it. Hades, the underworld. No one came back. And no one came back from Sheol either. So it was a late belief. We know Jesus believed in it because he mentions it. He actually gets into the one time that Jesus gets into a debate with the priests in the Gospels. This is in the Gospel of Mark, so it's early. They try to trip Jesus up on the resurrection of the dead. They ask him a tricky question to kind of show how silly believing in the resurrection of the dead is. And Jesus doesn't even argue with them. He just simply says outright, you don't know the power of God or the scriptures. And these are the priests. They don't know God. They don't know the sacred writings of Judaism. Not according to Jesus, because they don't believe in the resurrection of the dead. So it was a late belief that wouldn't have if people believed in it, what did they believe about it? Okay? That's another question. What did they conceive? They probably did not conceive a body coming back from the dead. That didn't make much sense. Certainly for the Greeks and the Romans. If someone did come back from Hades, you didn't want to come back in your body because your body was corruptible, your body was changeable. They didn't think that, if you came back, you come back perfected. No, they thought you come back kind of like in a zombie state. Okay, it'd be like a horror movie to come back from Hades in your body. No, that wasn't what you wanted to do. Or that's not the state of life you wanted. That was a nightmare. So, of course, when Christians go out into the larger world and start proclaiming this idea of, this man was crucified as a criminal, which also was ludicrous to people, that you're worshiping this dead criminal, as we know from the Examenos Graffito. But the fact that then you up the ante and say, if you can believe that, let me tell you something else, that he actually came back in his body from the dead. And that repulsed them. They thought that was ridiculous. So it wasn't the resurrection actually was not a selling point that people might think today. People might think today, because we're so imbued with the Christian idea, whether we know it or not, that, you die, but you come back perfect forever and you're happy. No, that's not how they conceived resurrection like that. That was not what you wanted. So this is the crowning truth of the Christian faith. This is from the Catechism. The resurrection, the raising of Jesus from the dead is the crowning truth of our faith. Of faith and believed and lived as the central truth. Yes, I know, Ms. Plunkett, a lot of Christians can focus on Jesus died for my sins. Jesus paid the price. You hear that a lot. You don't hear a lot of Christians make the selling point like Jesus was raised from the dead for me. And so now I will also be raised from the dead. You don't hear that a lot from Christians. That's interesting. But usually it's like about punishment. Jesus took on your punishment. Jesus wiped out your sins. Well, true. But that's not the central truth here. And this truth has been handed on by tradition. It was proclaimed before it was written down. Then it was written down, and that's where we get the New Testament from. Christians felt they needed to have the story written down. And it's proclaimed by the church as the essential part of the Paschal mystery along with the cross. It completes the cross. Because Christians don't just worship a dead man who's still dead, even if he might be in heaven, but he's still dead. You know? The thing is, he's not dead. I am the living one, as the book of Revelation says. I was dead, but now I'm alive forever and ever. He is the Lamb who appears to have been killed, but lives forever. Okay, so that's the resurrection. All right, God bless you all. Next week we'll get on to his teachings. Have a good weekend. Have a good day, sir. Da, 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 dee.